Look, I mean, it's the classic football pass of making it the state's responsibility, but also this enforcement of quarantine and isolation. I give the government 0% credit for this. Where was this a couple of weeks ago when people were meant to be quarantining? Where was this before Ruby Princess happened, before thousands of people just fled all over? The Prime Minister today, very proudly bragged about how the method of enforcement so far was this kind of piece of stationery, this kind of isolation card that everyone has to sign. That was our level of protection when the rest of the world is using everything from bracelets to GPS tracking to asking for instant photos for people's locations. So it's, I don't know whether to say too little too late or better late than never, because this has just been very poorly done. And probably the most concerning thing to me was the Chief Medical Officer's statement today saying that just yesterday they've been told by their expert body that the most important thing is to stop the flow of overseas people coming in with this disease. That is a lie by omission. The concept that yesterday is when you were told by your expert body is unbelievable. No serious doctor could believe that the experts were not screaming this at the government behind closed doors. It's very late.
So when do you think we'll see whether this is a success or not? Is that going to be in 2 weeks' time?
The problem with coronavirus is that the inactions or actions of today will only have a flow-on effect 2, if not really 3 weeks later. That's how long it takes for people to become hospitalised and go into ICU and die. So we might see some benefit of it then, but the real crime here is everything that we've excused so far and we could have prevented.
So do you think that these sort of measures should have been introduced months ago? Because Australia seemed to be on the front foot at the beginning of this virus outbreak when we banned all Chinese travellers.
Look, the truth is we know that these bans were being subverted. That we had universities encouraging students to come through kind of other countries. And you can have all the bans and recommendations for quarantine for overseas travels you want. You can test all the people you want. At the end of the day, what's going to stop transmission from the main source of transmission, which is overseas visitors coming in, is enforced quarantine and isolation. Enforcement has been the problem so far. And we're only just beginning to see policies put in place that should have been put in place, as you said, months ago.
So in terms of testing, the Prime Minister in that press conference today said that Australia is doing the most testing in the world. The Chief Medical Officer then said we're one of the top testers. How do we rate? Because we're hearing this a lot. And how do we compare to other countries that we know are doing a lot of testing?
So it's a complicated truth here. Like, it's actually valid that Australia has been testing a lot. I mean, one of the problems is we don't know how long we can sustain that. But the problem with Australian testing is that we've been focusing on this overseas population of people coming in because they are the ones who are most likely to have the disease. So while it's great we've been testing there a lot, what do we do once people are tested positive? We're asking them to quarantine and isolate, which they're not really doing. And so we're getting this false sense of security here of we're looking at the small number of cases trickling in from overseas and we're testing a lot, which is true. The question is, what do you do with those positive results? And one of my future concerns going forward is, with the lack of personal protective equipment for people to actually perform the tests on these patients, will we be able to sustain this level of testing? Will we be able to shift focus from overseas travellers coming in towards the wider community, which is how this disease is going to spread? And that's one of the things that's making me a bit nervous.
Well, I wanted to ask you about PPE stocks in Australia and where are we at in terms of that?
We are at the position of getting a lot of promises from the government that things are coming in. And the reality is, in hospitals and in GP clinics, we're short. It's not filling us with a lot of confidence. And it's really important for people to understand that this is not just about protecting doctors. We're hearing tales from Italy how one of the main drivers of transmission of the disease into the community is healthcare workers getting sick. So this is a huge concern. We're told there's stockpiles. We're told stuff is coming in. We're not really seeing it come in. Just very recently, we've had exemptions lifted by the Therapeutic Goods Administration on more PPE to kind of come in, but only the government can order it. So there's talk going on, there's pieces of paper being pushed around, but we're not seeing the masks.
Do you think this highlights our over-reliance on, say, medical equipment coming from countries like China, and that Australia needs to have some sort of capacity to manufacture these items ourselves?
I think this is going to be one of the enduring lessons, not just for Australia, but the rest of the world, that there are some things that are probably worth doing domestically and nationalising. And in fact, there's a lot of products that are actually being manufactured in Australia that are being sold overseas for other countries who need help. Now, that's not their fault, but the point is we don't have the regulation that can safeguard the things that are manufactured here. And of course, a lot of things are not manufactured here that we really now wish should be. So there's a lot for us to learn here.
I wanted to ask you, Queensland goes to the polls tomorrow to vote in by-elections and local council elections. There's something like 1.6 million people who could end up voting tomorrow. Should that be going ahead, in your view, as a medical professional?
I mean, it's difficult to imagine a better way to spread Covid-19 on Saturday. The reality is that everything is a risk. And yes, the Queensland government's, the Electoral Commission is saying that we're going to space people apart and have hand sanitizer. It's just not going to work like that. We know the reality is people lining up, clumping together, writing on the same surfaces, no bringing your own pencil is not going to fix the issue, as the government's saying. And people are at risk. The Chief Medical Officer of Queensland has said that everybody can come down to vote early in the week or on Saturday. It's safe. It's not true.
Well, she actually said that it's riskier to go to supermarkets than it is to vote on Saturday.
I'm sure she's done some modelling on that, which I'm not allowed to see. The reality is that we have a model for voting that works. We can do postal votes, and that's something that should have been organised much earlier to bring the risk from whatever it's going to be down to zero. It's still not too late. I mean, we can talk all about it's too late to stop this on a logistical level. If there was a flood tomorrow, we would stop the elections. We'd have them another date. It's not too late, and we need to do this in the safest manner possible as we face this pandemic.
I wanted to ask you about physical distancing, because I saw you tweeting earlier today that Australia has done a really good job, particularly in, say, Sydney and Melbourne, in terms of reducing our ventures outside. And then I've just seen on Twitter now there are photographs of St Kilda Beach from today where there seems to be a lot of people out on the beach. So is that message getting through? The Prime Minister seemed to thank all Australians for doing what they can.
It is, and it isn't getting through, and that's the issue. So we have data from companies like City Mapping, and also there's pedestrian data that gets mapped by Melbourne and Sydney that's showing that traffic has dropped down to 20% or 25% roughly of what's normally expected. But we're still getting these clusters of people collecting, and I think this is reflecting a failure of communication and messaging. I truly believe in my heart that if every one of those people understood what the stakes were, the power they have, the social responsibility they have to do the right thing, would be okay. And the fact that we are seeing results is showing that people are willing to change their behaviour. The problem is we are weeks behind on messaging from the government for a disease that doubles its cases every 4 days. So everyone needs to get on the same page. The government needs to do better, but also we all need to do better. And it's the job of medical professionals, the media, everyone to talk to their friends and convince them of the importance of what's at stake.